Bitcoin has been called a bubble. It's been called a Ponzi scheme. It's been called a scam. Lots of entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and investors have said that the blockchain technology underlying Bitcoin is really fascinating and it could revolutionize the world, but we don't really think that Bitcoin as a currency really has a lot of promise. In fact, Warren Buffett, who is, of course, one of the world's richest men and one of the most famous value investors, he said that the Bitcoin price was a mirage. And his vice chairman called it rat poison. So, are these guys right? Why does Bitcoin have value? I mean, how do we respond to these kinds of claims? I mean, there is something to them. A Bitcoin, it doesn't provide any dividends. It doesn't provide any rental income. It's not a financial obligation of any kind. It's not backed by any currency. You can't actually do anything with it except trade it to somebody else, but why would they want it? They've got the same problem. So why does a Bitcoin have value? That's the answer, or that's the question that I hope to try to shed some light on and to try to help answer. So where we should start is we should look at some other things that have value and try to understand why they have value. So for instance, real estate. Real estate has value because you can live in a piece of property and you can rent it out and get rental income. And you can look at the price of a piece of property and what you can rent it out for and look at what your return is going to be for your investment if you rent it out on the market. With a stock, stocks have value because companies have earnings. So, you can, when a company produces earnings, those earnings are either reinvested in the company or they're paid out to shareholders as dividends. And so you can look at things like the price to earnings ratio and figure out what the return on your investment is going to be and whether the price is high or low for that particular company. None of these things apply to Bitcoin. So maybe what Bitcoin is a commodity. Now, we know that commodities have value because they get consumed. A commodity has value because it's valuable to the end user who ends up consuming it. It's a little bit harder to reason about the price like you can using rental rates or dividends, price to earnings ratios like with stocks. But one trick that commodities traders use is they look at the stockpiles of a particular commodity. If the stockpiles are growing, you know that it's being produced faster than it's being consumed. And eventually, that is probably a good indicator that the price is going to have to come down over time to clear out that overhang of inventory. Or conversely, if stockpiles are shrinking, then that means that over time that it's being consumed faster than it's being produced. And as those stockpiles dwindle, the price is going to have to come up. So can we use this to figure out why Bitcoin has value? Well, we've got a little bit of a problem because a Bitcoin never actually gets consumed. Even if the price goes to zero, those Bitcoins aren't going to be consumed and used up and go away. They're still going to be there. So this isn't going to help us figure out why a Bitcoin has value. But there's something interesting. If you're a commodities trader and you're looking through a list of different commodities and looking at the size of the stockpiles of different commodities, there's one commodity that stands out that's really strange. It doesn't seem to follow the rules, and that's gold. Gold is really, really weird. Okay? If you look at how much gold gets consumed every year for industrial uses and subtract out what gets recycled, it turns out that the existing stockpiles of gold will last for something like 5,000 years. This makes no sense. If you're a commodities trader, you're going to want to go and short gold right away because obviously it's going to zero. What's going on here? Why why is this happening? You know, it's interesting that a lot of the same arguments that have been used against Bitcoin have also been used against gold, that it's inert, that it doesn't have any earnings, that it doesn't do anything. So, you know, if you look at the price of gold in 1971, it was $42 an ounce, and now it's $1,200 an ounce. That's a 2,500% return. If you look at the Dow Jones index, it was around 5,000 in 1971, and now it's just under 20,000. That's only a 400% return. So if you had listened to the people who said that you shouldn't invest in gold, you would have missed out. So what is going on with gold? Well, I think to try to understand this better, we have to do a thought experiment. So imagine that you have a fisherman. This fisherman is named Bob. He catches fish all day long, and he trades his fish for whatever else he needs. But the thing that Bob really wants more than anything else is a silver Mercedes luxury sedan with black Alcantara leather interior. This is his dream. This is what he really wants. His plan is to go fishing for a couple of decades and then go and get his Mercedes and retire in style. But right away, he's got a problem. You see, if he goes and goes fishing for 10 or 20 years and stores up his fish and then goes and tries to trade it for his Mercedes, he's going to have a big stinking pile of rotten fish. What Bob needs to do is he needs to trade his fish immediately after catching it for something that he can store. All right? And so let's say Bob picks Hummel figurines, these little collectible figurines. My mother used to collect these when I was growing up in Ohio. So he starts trading his fish for Hummel figurines, and he puts them in his garage, and he stores them up, and now he's got a big pile of Hummel figurines that aren't really doing anything. They're just kind of sitting there in his garage. This sounds a little familiar. So he's able to do this, and he solved the problem of the rotten fish. But let's take this a step further. Let's take a look at what if there's lots of people like Bob in the economy? Okay, so we've got other fishermen and other people who do other things, and they need a way to trade what they produce for something that they can store so that they can transfer purchasing power over time, so that they can store value. And they have to pick something too, and they're looking around, and you know what? These Hummel figurines have been in really hot demand recently. I don't know why. So a few of them decide to also pick Hummel figurines, and this just increases the demand for Hummel figurines, and the value of Hummel figurines is going through the roof. It's going up like crazy. And you know, this is really good for Bob. He's very excited. He's happy. But it's also really good for the Hummel Corporation. You see, their cost of production hasn't gone up, and their margins are huge now, and so they start producing Hummel figurines as fast as they can. They're ramping up production. They're pumping those babies out as fast as they can. And the value of Hummel figurines on the market starts to drop as they produce more and more of them. And the people who've gotten their Hummels more recently, they notice that they're not holding value like they used to. And so they decide to trade their Hummels for something else. And that just puts more Hummels on the market, which depresses the value even further. And then more people get rid of their Hummels, and before you know it, the great Hummel Bubble of 2017 is popped. And Bob's wiped out. You know, his dreams of retiring in style with his Mercedes are over. What's worse, he looks like an idiot. You know, he's being ridiculed, him and his friends, in the financial press. It's a disaster. What's worse is there was even some commodities traders who saw this huge stockpile of Hummels, and they shorted Hummels, and they look like geniuses. They made out like bandits. So two things to take away from this thought experiment is that, one, even though this just happened, there's still a need in the economy for people to store value. There's still a need for people to trade what they produce for something that can keep and that they can use to transfer their purchasing power over time. And the other thing about this is that what they want to pick is not a manufactured good, but something that's really difficult to produce more of, something that is scarce, or more precisely, that has an inelastic supply. So whatever it is that they pick, they want to pick something that, if it increases in value, is not going to cause the production of that thing to increase. because it can't for whatever reason. The supply is inelastic. And the more inelastic the supply, the better. Now, the other thing to notice is that there's this strong self-reinforcing cycle where whatever a large or whatever even a small number of people pick causes the value of that thing to increase. And that causes more people to pick it. And so you have this self-reinforcing cycle. Now, I imagine a lot of you have worked in the tech industry. People who've worked in the tech industry will immediately recognize this as something called a network effect, where the more people who pick something, the more valuable it becomes, which causes more people to pick it in this self-reinforcing cycle. Now, network effects can be very stable. You know, you tend to have a situation where you have one winner that takes over, and it becomes very difficult once this standard has been established, once this network effect has been established, it becomes very difficult for a competitor to come along and unseat it and to outcompete it. It can't just be a little bit better, it has to be a lot better in order to overturn a standard that's been established. One example I like to use to explain this is the email protocol. It turns out that the email protocol is actually a really horrible, horrible protocol. Okay? Anybody can pretend to be anybody else. It's completely insecure. You get huge amounts of spam in your inbox. The email protocol is so bad that there are entire industries built around trying to fix the problems with email. That's how bad it is. And yet, we all still use email because everybody else uses email. So now we have a little bit of understanding of what's going on with gold and also with Bitcoin, where this value is coming from. It comes from the fact that there's this standard that's been established. Apparently with gold, thousands of years ago, this standard was established, this network effect was established for storing value around gold. And that's why you have, you know, huge stockpiles of this stuff just sitting around in places like Fort Knox and in you know, the New York, in the New York Fed. Standards have been overturned, so it is possible to overturn these standards. You know, by my count, the standard for storing value has changed maybe twice in human history. Ancient cultures all over the world used to use seashells as money. Native Americans called it wampum. And the same was true in Europe and in Asia. Cultures all over the world used seashells as money. And you know, the reason that this kind of worked, they were relatively scarce. They had somewhat of an inelastic supply of seashells because it took a lot of time and effort to go and collect them. And in hunter-gatherer societies and in subsistence farming societies, you know, the time was not something that people had a great abundance of. And so it was difficult to go and collect more. But then this new technology came along called metalworking, and it enabled a new and much better form of money with precious metals, and the standard eventually became gold for this. And gold, of course, was much more difficult to produce more of, much more inelastic supply and more durable, and it was a much better form of money, and it was enough of an improvement that it was able to overturn the old standard of using seashells. And then about 1,500 years ago, a new innovation came along called banking. And banking, for most of its life, bank deposits were backed by gold, and only just recently, like in the last few decades, have they actually been completely divorced from gold backing. But banking helped solve some of the inconveniences of using actual gold, like physical gold as money, in that a bank deposit is actually just a piece of information. It's just an entry in a ledger, kind of like a Bitcoin. And because it's information, this allows it to be transported more easily and stored more easily. But of course, with the cost, in the case of bank accounts, of counterparty risk, where you're trusting the bankers not to pull any shenanigans. So maybe in retrospect, this wasn't such a great idea. But in any case, now we have a new technology that's come along. This is something that has only happened a few times in human history, where a new monetary technology comes along that enables a much better form of money. So now with Bitcoin, you have something that is perfectly inelastic. Once we hit the 21 million cap, it's impossible to produce anymore. Because it's pure information, it can be instantly transported anywhere at any time at the speed of light to anyone in the world instantly, almost for free. And of course, through the magic of cryptography, it has zero counterparty risk, so we don't have any problems with bankers pulling tricks. So I'll just close with this. I think that the best thing that any of us can do to help bring Bitcoin to the widest audience possible, to help spread adoption, is to use Bitcoin as a medium of storing value to help establish it as that standard. So the best thing that we can all do to help spread Bitcoin and bring the power and freedom that Bitcoin represents to everyone in the world is to store it, is to save in it, is to hoard it. That's the best thing that you can do to help bring Bitcoin to everybody, because it helps establish it as the standard. It helps increase Bitcoin's value. That's where the value of money comes from. It comes from the fact that people use it as a standard for storing value. Thank you.